She saved for months to afford a dream one first-class seat on a flight to her future. But just minutes after boarding, she was humiliated, denied service, and told people like you don't belong in first class. At 17 years old, Amira Brooks thought she was just flying to a scholarship interview. Instead, she became the center of a national firestorm because she had the courage to record everything. But what happens when the airline tries to flip the story, cancel her ticket, and paint her as the threat? What do you do when the people in power not only gaslight you, but start threatening your family, your future, even your safety? And how far would you go to fight back? This isn't just a story about discrimination at 30,000 feet. It's about resilience, resistance, and the power of truth when silence isn't an option. You won't believe how far this one flight spirals into national headlines, legal battles, and ultimately, justice. If you believe everyone deserves to belong regardless of their race, like, share, and subscribe, because what happens next will shake you. Let's begin. It was still dark when Amira Brooks stepped out into the chill of the Portland morning. Her breath fogged the air in short clouds, her fingers tugging nervously at the sleeves of her navy blazer. She had worn this outfit before, once for a regional debate tournament, once for a church scholarship interview, but this morning it felt different. Today, she wasn't just speaking for a prize. She was flying across the country to Washington, D.C., for the National Civic Leadership Summit, her shot at a full scholarship that could change her entire future. She had packed her documents in a carefully labeled accordion folder: transcripts, recommendation letters, printed essays, and a portfolio of her community outreach work. Everything she had achieved: the weekend food bank she organized, the tutoring sessions for kids in her neighborhood, the climate action petition she started at Jefferson High was represented in that folder. And now it sat snug in her backpack, next to a crumpled snack bar and her dad's copy of The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. At the terminal, her father hugged her tight, the kind of hug that says everything he wouldn't say out loud. He was a quiet man, a tenured professor of sociology at Portland Community College, more comfortable quoting W.E.B. Du Bois than giving life advice. "You got everything?" he asked. She nodded, swallowing. "Yeah, boarding pass, ID, mask, all good." Then, with a half smile, he reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "One last thing." Amira opened it. Inside was a first-class boarding pass. "Dad," what she blinked, "I thought we said economy." He shrugged. "I cashed in the faculty rewards points." "You've earned it. You deserve to feel what it's like not to squeeze your knees under someone else's seat for 6 hours. "First class," she whispered, staring at the thick paper like it might dissolve. "You didn't have to. I did," he said gently. "You're flying towards something big. Let it feel that way." She clutched the envelope tighter, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and guilt. Her dad wasn't rich, not by a long shot. They lived in a modest duplex near 42nd and Alberta. Faculty pay wasn't glamorous, and most of their extra income went into savings for emergencies that had a way of coming around every few months. But still, he'd done this. For her. At security. She waved one last time before disappearing behind the conveyor belt and the TSA bins. Her heart pounded as she clutched her backpack and walked toward the gate for Sun Vista Flight 184 to Reagan National Airport. At the gate, the agent smiled after scanning her boarding pass. "First time flying first class." Amira nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Well," the agent said, gesturing toward the window, "it's a pretty morning to fly east." She walked down the jet bridge slowly, taking in every moment. Her shoes tapped softly against the industrial carpet. Her eyes scanned the curvature of the plain silver body outside the small window, its wings catching the weak morning light. As she stepped onto the aircraft, the smell of coffee and pressurized air filled her nose. The first-class cabin was bright and calm, with cream leather seats, oversized tray tables, and a strange, curated silence she wasn't used to. The first person she saw was a middle-aged white woman in a pressed Sun Vista uniform with perfectly ironed sleeves and a pinned bun. Her name tag read Roxanne Neely. She was placing a stack of blankets into an overhead bin and turned toward Amira as she entered. Their eyes met for a moment too long. "Boarding pass," Roxanne said flatly, her voice without a hint of welcome. Amira hesitated, then offered it. Roxanne examined the pass as if trying to solve a riddle. She flipped it over, held it up, narrowed her eyes. Amira glanced nervously around the cabin. The man ahead of her, middle-aged, white, business casual, had walked through without pause. "Is something wrong?" Amira asked, keeping her tone polite. Roxanne returned the pass. "Seat 2B, left side." Amira walked carefully down the aisle, feeling eyes on her that may or may not have been there. Her seat was near the window, second row. She slid her backpack under the seat and sat down slowly, her hands smoothing her blazer, trying to quiet the pounding in her chest. The businessman next to her nodded briefly. "Morning. Morning," she replied softly. She reached for her folder, laying it gently on the tray table and flipping through the pages, anchoring herself in preparation. In less than 36 hours, she would be sitting across from an admissions panel of the top civic leadership council. She needed to be ready. She was ready. Outside, the tarmac buzzed with movement, but inside seat 2B, Amira Brooks tried to remind herself that everything was going to be okay. She didn't expect the storm that was coming. She didn't know that this single seat, was about to become a battleground. But for now, she simply looked out the window, watched the clouds roll in, and held on tightly to her father's gift. The flight had barely reached its cruising altitude when Amira noticed the silence around her was different. Roxanne Neely moved through the first-class cabin with fluid familiarity, offering hot towels and warm beverages, her smile fixed and crisp for every passenger except one. Amira sat quietly, watching her from the corner of her eye. She had removed her blazer and tucked it carefully behind her seat. Her folder was now closed, her pen resting across the top. Her father always said to observe before reacting. So she did. "Coffee or orange juice for you, Mr.?" Lynn and Roxanne asked with a pleasant lilt. "Coffee, thanks," he replied. Without even a glance in Amira's direction, Roxanne turned and walked away. Amira blinked. Her roommate looked up from his newspaper, but said nothing. She waited. Maybe Roxanne would return. Maybe she had simply forgotten. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Across the aisle, a woman in pearls sipped tea while flipping through a hardcover novel. 2 rows ahead, an elderly couple chatted softly as they were served fruit plates and yogurt. The space hummed with soft privilege, gentle laughter, low clinks of glassware, the quiet certainty of being catered to. Amira raised her hand slightly. "Excuse me," she said gently when Roxanne passed by again. The attendant paused but didn't smile. "Yes, I didn't receive a beverage," Amira said, keeping her tone neutral. Roxanne glanced at the tray. "Oh," she said, her voice flat. "I'll be back around." But she wasn't. Instead, Amira sat with her hands folded in her lap, heart fluttering. She reminded herself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe there had been a mistake. Maybe she looked too young. And Roxanne thought she was part of a school group, except there was no school group. Just her. You know. Mr. Lyndon said after a while, lowering his newspaper. I think they're serving breakfast soon. You want me to flag her down? Amira hesitated. No, thank you. I'll wait. There was something about the way Roxanne looked through her, not at her, but around her, that made her stomach tighten. Later, Roxanne returned with menus. She handed them out row by row with a practiced grace crisp linen, polite nods. She approached 2A, then 2C, then moved on. No menu for 2B. Amira sat frozen, unsure whether to call out again. She didn't want to appear needy. She didn't want to be that passenger. But she also knew what she felt. And what she felt wasn't an oversight. It was precision. She thought back to the way Roxanne had examined her boarding pass. The prolonged scrutiny, the subtle arch of an eyebrow, the way her tone had flattened once she realized the girl in the blazer, with the brown skin and the Oregon public school folder, wasn't sitting in coach. A small accident, perhaps, a small oversight, another small cut. She picked up her pen and turned to a blank sheet in her folder. Document everything. Her father had told her the night before, not because you're paranoid, because you've lived enough to know what silence costs. She wrote down the time, the missing menu, the ignored service. Next to her, Mr. Lyndon was absorbed in a crossword puzzle. Around her, the luxury of the cabin wrapped others like a warm blanket. To her, it felt like static, like something just off frequency. A memory flickered her 8th grade field trip to the art museum. She had worn a white dress and braided her hair in crown twists. At the museum entrance, the guard had singled her out from the line of kids for a bag check. Then again, when they left. Routine, they said. But she had noticed no one else's backpack was open twice. She hadn't said a word back then. But this time, something inside her had changed. Amira reached under the seat and retrieved her phone. Quietly, she slid it onto her lap, angled discreetly toward the aisle. No sound, no flashing light. Just open. Just watching. Just in case. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their position over the Rockies. Clear skies and a mild tailwind. A soft chorus of beeps followed as passengers unbuckled and adjusted their seats. As Roxanne walked past again, she accidentally brushed against Amira's tray. The edge of a water pitcher tilted just enough. A slosh of water spilled across the folder. "Oh my," Roxanne said, not sounding surprised at all. "I'll get a napkin." Amira froze, staring at the spreading moisture. Her notes were now damp, the ink beginning to feather. She pressed the pages against her lap, trying to stop the seep. Roxanne returned with 2 tiny cocktail napkins and dropped them unceremoniously onto the tray. "I really do apologize," she said, though her eyes said otherwise. Amira looked down at her soaked notes, then back up. Something cold passed between them, and then Roxanne turned and walked away. Amira had always believed there were 2 kinds of silence. The kind you sought when the world was too loud, and the kind that surrounded you when you weren't supposed to speak at all. In seat 2B, 32,000 feet in the air, she found herself wrapped in the second kind. Her hands were still slightly damp from blotting her notes. The cocktail napkins had left behind lint and frustration. She had used the blow from the air vent above to dry her papers as best she could. But the damage was done. A line of ink had bled through her resume. The corner of her essay curled from moisture. She reminded herself the work still counts, even if the pages don't look perfect. Across the aisle, The woman in pearls glanced at her, eyes flickering toward the mess, then politely away again. Amira wondered what she thought, if she thought anything at all. Maybe she hadn't noticed, or maybe she had and decided not to get involved. Amira folded her hands in her lap. Then she felt it, that gaze again. Roxanne stood a few rows down, speaking softly to another passenger, but her eyes occasionally flicked toward Amira like a radar that wouldn't power down. Something had shifted since the water spill. It was no longer subtle, no longer polite. There was a current beneath everything now, and Amira could feel it gathering speed. Her phone sat flat on her tray table, camera quietly recording again, angled just enough to capture her side of the aisle. She'd considered stopping. She didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but it already was. She thought of her dad again. The last thing he said before they left for the airport: "You don't have to fight every battle, but if you choose not to fight the one that matters, make sure it wasn't because you were afraid to be seen." She wasn't afraid. Not really. She just didn't want to make this trip about anything other than the chance she'd worked so hard for. That's when she heard footsteps stopping near her seat. "Please make sure your seatbelt is fastened," said a softer voice. Amira looked up. A different flight attendant stood beside her now. She wore her graying hair pulled into a tidy bun, and her name tag read Tessa Morales. Her tone was gentler, almost maternal. Her eyes flicked to the still damp papers and then back to Amira's face with something like understanding. "You okay here?" she asked quietly, almost under her breath. Amira hesitated. She searched the woman's face for judgment, for sarcasm. Found none. "I'm fine," Amira said. Tessa gave a small nod, then said, "If you need anything, just let me know." It wasn't much, but it was the first time since boarding that someone had acknowledged her as more than a mistake in the seating chart. A few minutes later, a voice spoke from across the aisle. "Young lady," came the words, low but clear. "You handled that better than I would have." Amira looked over and saw the woman with the pearls again, older than she'd first appeared. Her hair was steel gray, cropped close in a soft wave, and her skin was the rich mahogany shade of deep age and deeper wisdom. "I'm sorry," Amira said, surprised. "I saw what she did." The woman said, "The water, the way she looked at you. Some people think they can shame you quietly." Amira didn't know what to say. She gave a small nod. "Thank you. Don't let it ruin your day." "Sweetheart, they've been trying to push us out of first class since the day it was invented." She extended a hand across the aisle. "Elsie Green." Amira smiled for the first time in an hour. Amira Brooks. Elsie gave her a wink and returned to her book. The warmth of the moment didn't last long. Roxanne returned, this time with a stack of meal order slips and a pen. She paused at Amira's row. "Miss, do you need help understanding the menu?" Her voice was louder than it needed to be. Her eyes flashed something behind the smile condescension wrapped in customer service. Amira felt her face heat. "Mr. Lyndon glanced up from his crossword. "I can read it." "Thank you," Amira replied, evenly. Roxanne didn't respond. She scribbled something on her pad and moved on. "That was unnecessary. Mr. Lyndon mumbled, finally acknowledging what had been building. Amira gave him a quick look, but said nothing. It wasn't validation she needed. It was witness. A few moments later, as Roxanne passed back toward the galley, Amira watched her lean toward the woman seated in 2C. "Some people," she heard Roxanne say. Her voice dipped low. "Just don't know how to act up here." The passenger's mouth tightened into a smile, but she said nothing. And just like that, The invisible line grew thicker. It wasn't about spilled water. It wasn't about forgotten drinks. It was about the way one person in one uniform could make you feel like you had walked into a room not meant for you. Amira reached for her pen again and wrote a single line on a blank page. Being allowed somewhere is not the same as being welcomed. She looked out the window. The clouds stretched out like a white sea beneath them, unbroken and unknowable. She exhaled, slow and quiet. This flight was far from over. By the time the meal service began, the warmth in the cabin had chilled. It wasn't the air conditioning. It was the shift in tone, in glances, in the way things moved, or didn't. Roxanne returned to Amira's row with 2 breakfast trays. She handed one to Mr. Linden with practiced grace. Then, without speaking, she placed the second tray on the tray table across the aisle for a woman reading a travel magazine. Amira waited. Roxanne turned, looked right through her, and walked on. Mr. Linden cleared his throat. I think you forgot she didn't place a meal order, Roxanne replied curtly from the aisle without turning around. That's not true, Amira said quietly. You marked something when I told you I could read the menu just fine. Roxanne turned slowly, her voice syrupy now, but poisoned sweet. Oh, right. Unfortunately, we've run out of that option. We might have something from Coach, if you're okay with that. Amira forced a polite smile. Yes, that's fine. Thank you. Roxanne left without another word. Mr. Linden pushed his tray back, seemingly unsure what to do. That's not okay. Amira gave a small nod. It's fine. She lied. Really. But it wasn't. None of this was. And pretending otherwise was starting to feel like denial. As she pulled her phone out again to document the exchange, a voice echoed from behind her row. Excuse me. Miss A. man in a neatly pressed Sun Vista uniform stepped into view. His badge read, Grant Wexler, lead cabin attendant. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the tired polish of someone who had worked too many flights and memorized too many phrases. I understand you've had some concerns about the service, he said. Voice low, clipped. Amira blinked. I'm sorry Miss Neely informed me there were issues, he continued. We just want to make sure all passengers are following crew instructions and that the flight remains peaceful. Amira's stomach turned. She glanced at Miss Green, who raised an eyebrow in quiet disapproval. I haven't disrupted anything, Amira said carefully, but I have been ignored, spoken to with disrespect, and denied the same service as other passengers. Wexler gave a tight-lipped smile. I'm sure there's been some miscommunication. These things happen. Our crew is trained to follow protocol, which protocol includes ignoring a paying passenger. Elsie Green asked sharply across the aisle. Wexler paused. Ma'am, I appreciate your concern. I'm simply trying to ensure a safe and respectful environment. For whom she shot back. Because the only one being disrespected here is this young woman. He turned back to Amira. Miss Brooks, perhaps you misunderstood. Flight Attendant Neely is one of our most experienced team members. If she was firm, I'm sure it was warranted. That sentence landed like a slap. The same way teachers used to say you're too sensitive when she brought up being called names in class. The same way the store clerk said maybe you should check your bag again after she was followed down an aisle. Warranted. Amira felt something inside her crystallize. Not anger, not fear. Clarity. She folded her hands, made eye contact, and spoke with quiet steadiness. I didn't misunderstand. I've been treated differently since I boarded. I've documented it, and I'll continue to do so. Wexler's expression stiffened. Miss Brooks, Recording airline staff without consent can violate company policy and potentially federal law. I'm aware, she said calmly. I've reviewed the law. One-party consent. Oregon and D.C. both qualify. There was a pause. Mrs. Green let out a tiny of satisfaction under her breath. Wexler adjusted his tie. Regardless, he said, I suggest you refrain from further recordings. Let's all try to enjoy the rest of the flight. Amira said nothing. As he turned to leave, she noticed the glance he exchanged with Roxanne, who was now peeking around the galley curtain. There was something more here, something coordinated. She could feel it in the air. Tessa Morales passed by quietly a moment later. She paused just long enough to slip a napkin onto Amira's tray. It looked blank at first, but folded inside was a note, written in tidy block letters. You're not crazy. I see it too. Be careful. T.M. Amira's breath caught. She tucked the napkin into her folder and looked out the window again, her own reflection staring back at her. She wasn't just dealing with one person. She was inside a system, and it had rules written in invisible ink. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the flight pushed further east, somewhere over the Midwestern plains. The quiet hum of conversation faded into a hush of tray tables snapping shut and shoes slipping off beneath plush seats. But Amira's body remained alert, heart steady, back straight, palms cold. She'd barely touched the lukewarm alternative meal that finally arrived from the economy galley, a sealed sandwich in plastic and an off-brand bag of chips. Everyone else around her received full ceramic-plated breakfast omelets, fruit bowls, steaming rolls, but not her. She tried to eat anyway. She needed the energy. She had just taken a bite when Roxanne appeared again, this time without pretense. We need you to stow all loose items, she said, glancing pointedly at Amira's folder and phone. But the captain didn't say we were descending, Amira replied calmly, wiping her mouth. I'm aware of that, Roxanne said. This is a cabin-specific instruction. Please comply. Amira set her sandwich down, placed her phone screen down on her tray, and folded her folder closed. Fine. You don't need to sound defensive, Roxanne snapped. I'm just doing my job. The tone had shifted again. People nearby began to glance up. Mr. Lyndon fidgeted with his blanket. The woman across the aisle with the pearls, Elsie Green, put down her book. I'm not being defensive, Amira replied, voice cool, almost soft. I'm just responding. Roxanne leaned in, lowering her voice. We can't have attitude at 30,000 feet. Sweetheart. Amira's hands clenched beneath her tray. Mrs. Green spoke up without looking away from Amira. Child, you good, I'm fine, Amira said, blinking slowly. But she wasn't. Her composure had become armor, and it was cracking. Roxanne continued, These seats are usually for passengers who understand how things work. Maybe you'll know next time. Amira's voice came sharper than she intended. What exactly do you mean by that? The air snapped tight like plastic shrink wrap. You need to lower your tone, Roxanne said, glancing toward the galley where Wexler stood watching. I'm speaking at a normal volume, Amira said. The same volume you used. Roxanne's eyes flashed. You're being aggressive. A phrase Amira had heard before in classrooms, at store counters, even once at a school board meeting when she simply asked why her robotics club had been denied funding again. Aggressive. It was the word people used when you refused to shrink. Wexler approached. Is there an issue here, he asked, his tone sharp, managerial. She's being difficult. Roxanne answered quickly. Obstructive. Talking back. I haven't done anything wrong, Amira said. Voice steady now. She's been targeting me since I boarded. That's not true, Roxanne said, her voice now rising for the first time. She refused me service, spilled water on my materials, ignored me, publicly questioned my ability to read a menu, denied me the same meal as other passengers, and now she's threatening me for speaking up. Wexler's smile didn't touch his eyes. Let's keep our voices down. We don't want to escalate anything. Then stop escalating. Mrs. Green called out. We've all heard enough. Julian Lee. The young man, seated 2 rows back, leaned into the aisle. I've been filming, he said clearly. And she's right. It's all on video. Wexler turned to him. Sir, I'd advise against recording on an aircraft. It's against company policy. Company policy doesn't override state and federal law, Julian replied. And since this flight began in Oregon, one-party consent applies. The whole cabin had gone silent. The elderly man reading The Economist put his glasses down. The woman in the red pantsuit across the aisle paused her podcast. Then it happened. Amira stood to stretch slowly, calmly, her back stiff from tension. I'm going to use the restroom, she said aloud, not asking permission. She moved toward the first-class lavatory, which was unoccupied, and then Roxanne stepped directly in front of her. The lavatory for coach passengers is in the back, she said loudly. I'm not in coach, Amira replied, her voice low but intense. You've seen my seat? You've seen my boarding pass? You know what I mean, Roxanne hissed. And then the sentence that shattered the air. People like you don't belong in first class. Everything stopped. No cabin noise, no engine hum, no overhead chimes. Amira's phone, held loosely in her hand, was still recording. The words hung between them, naked, raw, undeniable. Mr. Linden stood up. That's enough. Mrs. Green snapped her book shut and turned to the aisle. Say that again. I dare you. Julian Lee rose too, holding up his phone. I got it. Crystal clear. Wexler began moving quickly toward them, gesturing with one hand. Everyone remained seated. Amira, eyes locked on Roxanne's. Whispered one sentence that cracked like ice. I'd like to speak with the lead flight attendant supervisor now. I am the lead, Wexler said, arriving beside her. Then I need to speak with the captain, Amira replied. You don't have that right, he snapped. Yes, she said. I do. For a moment after the words left Roxanne's mouth, people like you don't belong in first-class time did not move. The cabin air, usually filled with small talk, soft clinks, and rustling pages, was replaced by a silence so sharp it could cut skin. Amira didn't move. Her heart didn't race. Her face didn't twist. She stood still in the aisle like a tree refusing to bend. The shame Roxanne had tried to lay on her didn't stick. It rolled off, because it wasn't hers to carry. I need to speak to the pilot, Amira said again, her voice firm, no longer asking. You're being disruptive, Wexler snapped, stepping closer, voice edged with threat. Return to your seat immediately. Disruptive, Mrs. Green's voice rang from behind. You want to talk about disruption? I've been sitting here this whole flight, and all I've seen is this girl trying to exist in peace. Wexler ignored her. Miss Brooks. I'm asking one last time, young woman, said a deeper voice from row 4. A man stood slowly, adjusting the lapel of his gray blazer. May I speak? All eyes turned. He was middle-aged, perhaps early 50s, with sharp eyes behind wire-frame glasses. He had been nearly invisible until now, half hidden behind a laptop and noise-canceling headphones. I've remained silent until this moment, he said. But I was seated within earshot. I heard everything, and I will testify, on record, that your flight attendant used racially discriminatory language toward this passenger. And you are, Wexler asked, voice brittle. Dr. Anthony Chen, civil rights attorney, former deputy counsel for the ACLU. Julian Lee turned to look at him. You too. Chen gave a tiny nod. Wexler hesitated. Then, sir, this is a private airline matter. I need you to return to your seat. Discrimination isn't private. Dr. Chen replied evenly. It's public, it's systemic, and it's illegal. Roxanne looked pale for the first time. She turned and disappeared into the galley. Amira remained standing, still not trembling, still not breaking. Julian Lee took 2 steps forward and handed Amira a business card. I'm recording too. Law student at Georgetown. I've got everything. You're not alone. Mrs. Green stood up next, slowly but deliberately, bracing herself on her armrest. You know what this reminds me of sitting in the back of a bus in Mississippi in 1961. Except now, the tickets are digital and the insults wear a smile. Applause didn't break out, but a murmur of support passed through the cabin, like a ripple. Wexler retreated to the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we ask for your cooperation and remaining calm during a temporary cabin issue. Is truth now considered an issue? Elsie asked out loud. Amira returned to her seat slowly, legs stiff, hands still recording. Her phone buzzed a new message from her father. Elijah Brooks, saw your text. Don't speak further without counsel. Calling Naomi now. Don't delete anything. I'm so proud of you, no matter what happens. She placed the phone flat on her tray table and breathed. Tessa Morales reappeared a few minutes later, glancing cautiously around the cabin before leaning in. You okay? She asked under her breath. Amira nodded once. I believe you, Tessa whispered. I've seen this before. I just never had witnesses. You do now, Amira whispered back. Tessa gave a tiny nod and slipped away. Moments later, a tall black man in row 6 who hadn't said a word, all flights stood up, walked to Amira's row, and handed her a folded napkin. Inside was a handwritten note. We saw it. We heard it. We're with you. 6B, 6C, 6D. Amira folded it into her folder, where it joined Tessa's earlier note. A mosaic of silent resistance was forming. Then the cabin chime rang again. Wexler's voice returned to the intercom, carefully modulated. Ladies and gentlemen, we have informed ground operations of a situation involving a non-compliant passenger. Authorities may meet the flight upon arrival. Please remain seated until further notice. Gasps, murmurs, tension. Amira's pulse quickened, but her face remained impassive. Julian leaned over the seat. They're trying to flip the story, make you the threat. I know, she said quietly. Dr. Chen leaned forward. It's an old playbook. Intimidation, isolation, then removal. I'm not afraid, Amira replied, though her throat tightened. Mrs. Green reached over and gently took Amira's hand. That's exactly why they're afraid of you. And for the first time since boarding, Amira let her hand be held, not because she was weak, but because she finally understood. This fight had witnesses, and she was no longer standing alone. As the plane began its descent into Washington, Mara. The cabin was gripped by a tension so thick it was almost breathable. Grant Wexler had stopped patrolling the aisles. He stayed mostly near the galley now, whispering on the crew phone with his back turned. Roxanne was nowhere to be seen. The calm voice of the pilot came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We'll be landing at Reagan National in approximately 17 minutes. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and all carry-on items are secured. We appreciate your cooperation." But there was no mention of the unspoken situation that had hijacked the atmosphere since Kansas. Amira sat still in seat B, the plastic cup of untouched water on her tray now vibrating with subtle turbulence. Her folder was closed, her phone still recording discreetly. Her fingers itched to check her messages. She unlocked her phone. Amira Brooks. "Naomi confirms you are being targeted. Tell Tessa nothing further unless she explicitly offers legal support. Sit tight. There's more going on than you can see. Naomi Blackwell." "Hi, Amira. I'm your legal contact now. Do not surrender your phone. Do not delete footage. Authorities may try to separate you. Ask for counsel and say nothing more." The notifications kept coming, and then one stood out: Sun Vista Airlines. Flight update. "We regret to inform you that your return ticket, confirmation S3Z64, has been canceled due to a violation of passenger conduct policy. For assistance, please contact customer support." Amira's heart sank. She tapped frantically through the app. Her reservation was gone. Her profile was locked, canceled, not postponed, not flagged, just erased. She turned to Julian. "They canceled my return ticket." Julian's eyebrows lifted. "Retaliation. Text Naomi. Screenshot everything." She did. Every notification, every status screen. She felt herself beginning to shake, but she willed her body still. "Mrs." Green leaned over. "They're escalating. Like we knew they would." A few rows back. "Dr." Chen unbuckled early against policy and crossed the aisle to Amira's row. He handed her a slip of paper, a printed list of your rights when questioned by authorities in transit zones, signed and dated by a legal nonprofit. "Give this to them if they try to detain you," he said calmly. "Will that stop them?" Amira asked. "No," he said, "but it documents that you knew your rights, even if they didn't care." The landing gear dropped with a mechanical thud. The final descent began. Amira leaned her head back and looked at the ceiling. The cabin lights shifted from dim to bright again. She closed her eyes for a moment and whispered silently, "Whatever happens, stay calm. Stay you." As the wheels screeched onto the tarmac, passengers instinctively clapped. A habit, a reflex. Not this time. When the aircraft slowed and taxied toward the gate, no one cheered. They all watched. Through the window, Amira could see them two airport police officers waiting at the gate, standing still beside a TSA supervisor. The jet bridge locked in place with a metallic groan. Grant Wexler appeared again. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We have a minor security matter to resolve before deplaning." He looked straight at Amira. "Young lady, please gather your belongings. You've been asked to speak with authorities." Amira stood slowly, her back straight, her eyes locked with his. "I'm not speaking to anyone without legal representation." "Of course," Wexler said, his smirk subtle. "We're just trying to keep things safe for everyone." Dr. Chen stood too. "I'll accompany her." "You're not authorized," Wexler snapped. "I'm a licensed attorney in 3 states. Try me." Julian stood behind them. "She's not alone. We've all seen what happened." Tessa Morales walked down the aisle toward them, face pale, hands trembling slightly. "I'll give my statement too," she said, her voice thin but firm. Wexler tried to hold control, but it was unraveling. One of the officers stepped onto the aircraft. "Miss Brooks." "Yes, please come with us." "I'm invoking my right to counsel," Amira replied. "I will not answer questions without legal representation. This is a civil matter, not a criminal one." "Dr. Chen nodded. "Let's go." As they stepped onto the jet bridge, Amira glanced back at the rows of passengers watching. Some sympathetic, others unsure, some avoiding eye contact altogether. Mrs. Green gave her a slow nod, the kind that meant, I see you, and I saw all of it. Julian tapped his chest once and mouthed, I've got your back. And then she was gone. The jet bridge was bright and clinical. She was escorted through a side hallway, past the main terminal flow, into a sterile office with metal benches and one table. Inside, 2 men waited airport security supervisors. One of them spoke in a falsely pleasant tone. Miss Brooks, we just want to understand what happened. I'm not answering anything without counsel, Amira repeated. You've been notified. Outside the door, Dr. Chen was calling Naomi. They had prepared for this, but the fight was changing now. This wasn't just about spilled water and skipped meals. This was about power and who had the right to speak. The small security office inside Reagan National Airport felt more like an interrogation room than a passenger lounge. Neutral gray walls, a round table bolted to the floor, a surveillance camera in the corner with a blinking red light. One officer stood near the door. The other, seated across from Amira, casually tapped a pen on a clipboard. We're not accusing you of anything, Miss Brooks, he said with forced calm. We're just trying to resolve a situation. The flight crew reported you were non-compliant and made other passengers feel uncomfortable. Amira folded her hands. I haven't broken any laws, she said evenly. I've complied with every safety instruction. I've recorded multiple incidents of racial discrimination. I've invoked my right to legal representation, and I'm not answering further questions. The officer exchanged a glance with his partner. You understand refusing to cooperate could delay your departure from the airport. Amira didn't blink. I'm not detained. You said that yourself. So unless you're arresting me, I'd like to wait for my attorney. The door opened. Dr. Anthony Chen stepped in, flanked by a second woman in a charcoal pantsuit and heels that clicked with purpose. She extended a card before the officers could speak. Naomi Blackwell, Civil Rights Counsel. Miss Brooks is now under legal protection. This interview is over. The officers hesitated. We were just trying to intimidate a minor without representation. Naomi cut in. You've already crossed 2 lines and stepped on a third. I suggest you sit down and start recording her side properly, or we can move this to federal jurisdiction. Dr. Chen placed a folder on the table. Here's a preliminary report with witness names and statements. Multiple passengers are prepared to testify. We also have flight audio and video. Naomi glanced at Amira. You okay? Amira nodded, barely holding back the tremor in her throat. Yeah, I am now. The officers backed off. The interview was paused. Official logs were amended, but Sunvista Airlines wasn't finished. As they exited the security office, Amira saw her name on the airport alert board by the gate flagged with a security review. Her profile photo from the airline's mobile app had been pulled up. It was no longer just a flight issue. She'd been added to a list. Julian Lee was waiting just outside security with his phone. I've posted the video, he said. Within 30 minutes, it hit 70,000 views. Amira blinked. You posted it. I blurred your face until you give the okay. But the audio's clear. The words are hers, and people are furious. He held up his phone, showing comments pouring in. Flight attendant told a black teen she didn't belong in first-class fire. Her systemic discrimination caught on tape. Not surprised. Still disgusted. Where's the airline statement? This is a lawsuit waiting to happen. Naomi nodded. Good. We needed this public Sun Vista's betting on silence. We're giving them the opposite. As they walked through the terminal, reporters began to appear. Someone had leaked the incident. A man with a press badge from the Washington Post caught up with them. Is it true the flight crew called authorities on a minor for requesting equal service? No comment at this time, Naomi said, shielding Amira gently. But trust me, we'll be speaking soon. Then another reporter, this one from a local ABC affiliate. Miss Brooks, did a crew member actually say, people like you don't belong in first classes? Amira hesitated. She looked at Naomi, then at Julian, then at Dr. Chen. Finally, she turned to the camera. She did, and with that, the floodgates opened. By the time they reached baggage claim, the story was trending nationally under the hashtag #BusFlyingWhileBlack. Naomi turned to Amira. We need a secure location. You're not going home tonight. I have my scholarship interview in the morning, Amira said. And you're going to ace it, Naomi said. But first, we protect you. Then, we prepare. Dr. Chen nodded. We've arranged a secure suite nearby. A friend with the State Department, as they drove out of the terminal in a tinted black SUV. Amira stared out the window at the rows of jet bridges, glowing under the late afternoon sun. Somewhere in those gates, Roxanne was probably already writing her statement. Somewhere in a boardroom, someone was already crafting a PR spin. But Amira didn't feel powerless anymore. She felt seen. She had witnesses. She had legal firepower. She had the truth. And now, finally, she had the world's attention. The suite where Amira spent the night overlooked the Potomac, the river stretching wide and still under the weight of dawn. The lights of DUC twinkled below, indifferent to her sleeplessness. Inside, the mood was hushed but electric, like the calm before the strike of a match. Naomi had stayed up organizing witness affidavits. Julian had been coordinating media interest. Dr. Chen had been fielding calls from 3 civil rights groups already preparing to file joint legal motions. But Amira, she had been quiet. Not withdrawn, just inward. At 6:30, she stood in the mirror of the hotel's second bathroom, fastening the buttons on a crisp slate-gray blouse Naomi had bought her after the airline ruined her original outfit. Not quite what I had planned, Amira muttered, brushing a crease. Naomi appeared in the doorway, her eyes gentle. Maybe not, but it still looks like someone who belongs wherever she walks. Amira gave a half smile. Even in first class. Especially in first class. By 8 a.m., they were pulling up outside the red brick building of the Eastbridge Scholars Foundation, one of the most competitive civil service and leadership scholarships in the country. Naomi offered to walk her in, but Amira declined. This part, I want to do alone. Dr. Chen passed her a manila folder. Inside were several printed witness statements, a brief timeline of the flight incident, and a letter of legal attestation. Only bring it up if they do, he said, but be ready. She nodded. Thank you. Amira walked in through the revolving doors, clutching her resume folder, damp pages replaced overnight by reprinted versions Tessa had scanned for her before they deplaned. Even now, an echo of that moment, the spilled water. The paper warping sliced through her memory. A receptionist guided her into a conference room, where 3 panelists sat 2 men and a woman, each with notebooks, tablets, and steaming mugs of coffee. Good morning, Miss Brooks, said the older gentleman in the center. We've read your application with great interest. Let's begin. For the first 30 minutes, the questions came like an ordinary interview. Tell us about the Food Access Initiative you co-founded in Portland. What's a leadership moment you're proud of? How do you handle unexpected challenges? And then the woman on the left leaned forward. We understand you had an unusual flight experience getting here. Amira exhaled slowly. I did. Would you like to speak about it? Amira sat straighter. I would. She paused just for a second, then began. In the past 24 hours, I was denied service, humiliated, and told verbatim that people like me don't belong in first class. I was questioned by security, had my return flight canceled, and became the subject of a media story I didn't ask for. All for sitting in a seat my mother bought with her miles. She stopped. One of the panelists was already scribbling notes. But that's not the full story, Amira continued. The full story is I stayed calm. I documented everything. I received support from strangers who became allies. And I walked in here today because none of that is going to stop me from becoming the kind of leader who changes that system. Silence followed. Not the awkward kind, the respectful kind, the heavy kind. Finally, the man on the right spoke. Why civil rights? Because I've lived what it feels like to be erased in plain sight, she replied, and I want to make sure fewer people have to. They asked her 2 more questions. She answered with the same quiet confidence, and when it was done, she walked out feeling no certainty, but no shame either. Naomi and Dr. Chen waited across the street in a cafe, watching the entrance. When Amira emerged, she crossed the sidewalk with slow, even steps and sat down beside them. Well, Naomi asked. Amira gave a tiny nod. I told the truth. That's all that matters. Doctor, Chen said. Naomi raised her coffee cup. To whatever comes next. The email came at 4:13 a.m. Naomi's phone pinged first, then Dr. Chen's, then Julian's. Subject resolution proposal confidential from corporate counsel. Sun Vista Airlines inside. A 4-paragraph message written in smooth legalese. Formal, but not cold. Precise without saying anything meaningful. Sun Vista Airlines is prepared to offer a confidential settlement to resolve all concerns raised by Miss Amira Brooks stemming from the events aboard Flight 728. The proposed resolution includes a full scholarship to any university of her choosing, first-class flight benefits for 10 years, and a financial sum in the high 6 figures. In exchange, Ms. Brooks agrees not to pursue further action or commentary regarding the incident and to release all recordings and documentation obtained during or after the flight. Naomi sat at the edge of the hotel suite's window, phone in hand, face unreadable. Dr. Chen exhaled deeply. It's a bribe. They want to buy the narrative, Naomi said. Wrap it in velvet and bury it under NDAs. Julian, groggy and sitting cross-legged on the carpet, added, They're afraid. That's why it's high 6 figures and not a lawyer's retainer. They all turned when the door creaked open. Amira stood in the hallway, hoodie over her head, arms folded. I saw it, she said simply. I'm not taking it. You don't have to decide now, Naomi said, rising. This is your call. No pressure. No, I am deciding now. Amira said, if I take that offer, I'm giving them permission to do it again to someone who can't fight back. She looked down at her hands. They didn't just spill water on my transcript. They tried to erase me, like I was disposable, like dignity was optional, and they only care now because I had the nerve to speak. Julian blinked. What if we made the story even bigger? Doctor, Chen looked intrigued. You mean go public strategic release? Not just public, Amira said. Comprehensive. Coordinated. All of it. Naomi tilted her head. We'd need airtight documentation, witness statements, video, Employee testimony. We can't leave a single crack. We won't, Dr. Chen replied. I've seen class actions built on less. Amira sat at the edge of the coffee table. Let's show them what it looks like when the person they tried to silence decides to speak with a microphone instead. That morning, the suite became a war room. Tessa Morales, the sympathetic flight attendant, sent over a confidential affidavit via encrypted email, stating what she witnessed and what crew members said in the galley. 3 passengers from rows 5 and 6 agreed to go on record with statements and video clips. Julian compiled a chronological case timeline with transcripts, matching exact quotes to the time codes from the recordings. By noon, the team had a 57-page media brief, a secure folder of raw footage, and a list of sympathetic journalists. Naomi called a contact at the New York Sentinel, a Pulitzer-winning civil rights reporter. You'll want this story, she said. They met in secret that evening. Amira recounted everything, every word, every moment, every act of courage and quiet humiliation. The journalist never interrupted. At the end of the interview, he simply said, "You're about to become a very public person." Are you ready for that? Amira thought for a long moment. I'm not ready, but I'm willing. That night, the brief was distributed to 4 national outlets under embargo. A documentary producer reached out the next morning. So did 3 civil rights coalitions, 2 airlines' internal whistleblowers, a former Sun Vista employee who'd been pushed out for making things uncomfortable when she filed a race-based complaint in 2021. Within 48 hours, the Flying While Black hashtag hit 4.2 million mentions. Sun Vista's carefully composed PR strategy began to unravel. They posted a statement on their website. We deeply regret any misunderstanding aboard Flight 728. We are reviewing our training protocols to ensure all passengers feel safe and respected, but it was too late. A clip of Roxanne's voice saying, "People like you don't belong in first class," had already been played on 5 news channels. Amira's calm interview on the Today Show, sitting between Naomi and Julian, went viral. I didn't want to be a headline. I just wanted to make my scholarship interview. But if telling the truth makes me loud, then I'll be loud with purpose. At the same time, something else happened. Pilots began speaking up. One anonymously sent Amira's team a photo of a watch list circulated internally to monitor passengers who didn't fit the first-class profile. Another described a behavior flagging system that targeted passengers most likely to record and cause HR issues. The evidence snowballed. Class action lawyers took notice. Regulators began poking around, and Sun Vista's stock started to slide. By the end of the week, Amira sat by the same window overlooking the Potomac, a cup of tea in her hands. Naomi sat beside her. You were offered silence and a check, Naomi said, and you chose to speak instead. Amira nodded. Because my story's not just about me. It's about how many times this happened to people who didn't have cameras, who didn't have lawyers, who were made to feel like they didn't belong. Naomi raised her cup. To the ones who spoke anyway. It didn't happen all at once. The collapse came in stages, each quieter than the last, like a structure falling in slow motion, one beam at a time. First came the mass cancellations. Travelers began posting screenshots of their canceled Sun Vista tickets under the hashtag not flying Sun Vista. Some airlines even offered matching fares to customers who abandoned their Sun Vista bookings. Then came the investor revolt. By the end of the 3rd week, Sun Vista's stock had lost 31% of its value. 2 major institutional investors publicly demanded leadership changes and transparency regarding racial discrimination policies. One financial news site headlined its front page, Flight 728 is Sun Vista's Titanic. Next came the employee walkouts. It started with 200 flight attendants calling in sick on the same day. Then the pilots. Then several airport ground crews who had quietly formed an internal group SVE, Sun Vista Employees for Equity. They issued a statement. We stand with Amira Brooks. We've seen what happens behind the curtain. We will not uphold systems designed to humiliate passengers based on race or class. The media couldn't keep up. Every day, a new angle broke. A second lawsuit filed by a black businesswoman who had been downgraded accidentally 3 times in 6 months. An internal video leaked from a Sun Vista training module, in which instructors used coded phrases like evaluate first-class presence and monitor for unfamiliar behaviors. A former HR executive revealed that 16 complaints related to first-class discrimination had been quietly settled in the last year alone. On Capitol Hill, Representative Lila Saldana called for immediate hearings. This isn't about one bad flight. It's about a company culture that built discrimination into its business model and got away with it until now. At the same time, FAA regulators launched a formal investigation into Sun Vista's passenger behavior alert algorithm, which had been disproportionately flagging people of color for secondary screening. And then, the resignations began. First, the VP of Customer Experience, then the General Counsel, then the board chair. But it wasn't enough, because the public wanted one name, Roxanne Neely. And more than that, they wanted to know who trained her, who protected her, and who let her say what she said without consequence. The final blow came on a Thursday morning when the Department of Transportation and the Department of Justice announced a joint civil rights investigation into Sun Vista Airlines. Attorney General Maria Calderon addressed the press. When corporations use their power to silence victims, deny truth, and institutionalize discrimination, they do not just violate public trust, they violate the law. We intend to hold Sun Vista fully accountable. In the War Room suite overlooking the Potomac, the team sat in stunned silence as the announcement played on 3 screens. Naomi slowly closed her laptop. Well, she said, it's no longer ours to carry alone. Amira didn't smile. She just let out a long, shaking breath. Good, she said. Then maybe this means someone else won't have to go through it next time. That evening, Sun Vista's interim CEO issued an emergency press release. They announced the immediate termination of Roxanne Neely and Grant Wexler, the suspension of passenger profiling protocols, the launch of a comprehensive diversity retraining initiative. But no one applauded because it was too late. The apology wasn't for Amira. It was for the markets. A week later, Amira testified before Congress. She walked into the hearing room wearing a dark blazer and a gold pin from her old community service club. No makeup, no lawyers flanking her. Just her. She gave a 17-minute opening statement without notes. I didn't ask for this platform. I didn't want to be famous. I just wanted to be treated with dignity. But the moment I was told people like you don't belong in first class, I realized something. Maybe I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And maybe speaking out wasn't just my right, it was my responsibility. By the end, several representatives were visibly shaken. The clip aired across every major news network that night. Social media exploded again, this time with a new hashtag, Amira Speaks. 6 months later, Amira Brooks sat on the steps of Evers Hall at Stanton University, watching the campus lawn erupt in spring green. Her black backpack rested beside her. Her books, Constitutional Law, Civil Ethics, a copy of Letters from Birmingham Jail were stacked neatly in a pile. She looked different now. Not older, not louder, but centered, balanced, like someone who had walked through fire and come out with the match still in her hand. Earlier that morning, A letter had arrived in her dorm mailbox, marked with a presidential seal. Dear Miss Brooks, in light of your courage and contributions to national dialogue on systemic equity, I am appointing you to the newly formed Civil Rights Passenger Advisory Board. I believe you'll represent the future of ethical leadership in this country. Respectfully, President Simone Kittredge. She hadn't stopped smiling since. Across campus, students passed her, some nodding in recognition, some too shy to speak. A few stopped just to say, "Thank you." She didn't ask what for. She knew, in the wake of the congressional hearings, Sun Vista Airlines filed for bankruptcy, its reputation, revenue, and leadership all irreparably destroyed. A federal watchdog agency took over its passenger records, exposing years of discriminatory profiling data. Its assets were sold off, and its name, once on tarmacs from Atlanta to Anchorage, disappeared from terminals nationwide. But the story didn't end with a company folding. It ended with something new rising. The Amira Brooks Passenger Fairness Act, introduced by Rep. Lila Saldana and co-sponsored by 41 legislators across party lines, passed with bipartisan support. The law included mandatory anti-bias training for all airline employees, independent review boards for discrimination complaints, public disclosure of profiling data and response protocols, legal protections for passengers who record onboard misconduct. For the first time in aviation history, the federal government named systemic discrimination as a safety issue, not just a social one. At the same time, Naomi Blackwell and Dr. Anthony Chen launched a nonprofit, Skybound Justice, a coalition of attorneys, journalists, and civil rights organizers focused on racial equity in transportation systems. Julian Lee became their director of digital strategy. His first project, a searchable database of discrimination complaints in air travel open to the public, updated in real time. Tessa Morales, the flight attendant who had quietly passed Amira that note on Flight 728, became a whistleblower and now trained cabin crews nationwide on ethical passenger engagement. And Amira, she changed majors, from pre-med to public policy. "I thought I wanted to fix bodies," she said during her campus radio interview, "but now I want to fix systems." Her scholarship had been reinstated and doubled. She now mentored high school students across the country who reached out through her foundation's website, First Class Belonging. A few months into the school year, she received a surprising email from C. Reed Stanton, EDU subject roommates. "Hi, Amira. My name's Sierra Reed. I'm your new assigned roommate next semester. I thought I should tell you my older sister was Roxanne Neely's partner. I know that name probably means something awful to you, and I completely understand if you want a different room, but I hope maybe we can talk. I want to learn, and if you're willing, I'd like to listen." Amira stared at the screen for a long time. Her instinct: close the tab, move on. But then she thought of something her mother once said: "You don't have to forgive what's broken, but you can choose not to carry its weight." She typed her response: "Hey, Sierra. Thanks for reaching out with honesty. That means more than you probably know. I don't expect this to be easy, but I've learned that change starts with conversations no one wants to have. So yes, let's talk. See you next semester. Amira." That evening, as the sun set across Stanton's spires, Amira walked across the lawn to the new Rivers Equity Center, where she was scheduled to speak at a panel on youth-led reform. As she stepped up to the podium, she glanced at the front row. There sat Naomi, Dr. Chen, Julian, her parents, Tessa, even two former Sun Vista employees who had testified anonymously but now held jobs at Delta, flying without fear. She cleared her throat. And then, with poise carved from every moment she'd survived. Amira Brooks began on a plane 6 months ago. I was told I didn't belong, but I'm here to say that belonging doesn't come from someone else's permission. It comes from the truth you carry inside you. When you know who you are, when you know what's right, you don't wait for space to open. You make room for yourself and for everyone who comes after. The applause wasn't thunderous. It was steady, grounded, like her, like the legacy she had built 30,000 feet in the air and still rising. She boarded that plane with a dream. She left it with a fire. Amira Brooks didn't want to be a headline. She just wanted to make it to her interview. But when she was told she didn't belong, she chose to document, to speak, to fight. And in doing so, she exposed not just one person's prejudice, but an entire system's design. This story reminds us that racism doesn't always wear a hood. Sometimes it wears a name tag. Sometimes it serves water to everyone but you. But what they didn't expect was that the girl in seat 2B would rewrite the rules for every passenger who ever felt othered in silence. If this story moved you, if you believe no one should be told where they don't belong because of the color of their skin, don't let this end here. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to see it. And subscribe to our channel for more true stories of justice, dignity, and courage, because every voice matters. Every recording counts. And sometimes, one teenage girl with a phone can bring an entire airline to its knees. We'll see you in the next story. Stay strong, stay seen, stay loud,